What's up, gangsters? It is now time for part 3 of this brough superior build adventure. And I wish I could say it was going to be about something other than the wheels, but it's not. And there's going to be a part 4. It's frustrating because I thought this would be relatively straightforward, and right when I thought I was doing good, well, things kind of went awry, as you'll see. But that's just the nature of doing one of these build diary adventure things, especially when you're doing a new type of project and getting into unexplored territory. So here it is. Okay, so it's been a few weeks, and I have mostly been working on a different project, but now I want to get back to working on these wheels. And one thing I have done is prime them with the aforementioned Gravity 2K surface primer. I think I covered this, but this is a high build 2-part urethane primer, which means that it has quite a bit of filler in it, which makes it good for taking care of small surface imperfections and helping you build up a nice sandable surface. And it's also going to make a really tough coating that will bond really well to that bead blasted finish. Now, what it means by 2K, if you don't know, is that it requires a hardener to activate it. It's a catalyst, basically creates a cross-linking reaction. It's just like a 2K clear gloss urethane that you would put on a base coat clear coat system to get that really nice wet look gloss. Same basic material, just formulated differently so that you end up with a primer. And this, I think, is going to be a really good choice. As you can see, these have all been shot, and I've already done some sanding on one of these, on this hub, and you can see what I mean about how it does a good job of filling in. I think I mentioned those scratches that were left from all of my filing and sanding that I had done before, and you can see how the primer has done a pretty good job of filling those in. These have been sitting here for a bit and they're a little dusty. So you can see I've burned through it a little bit, a couple places. My plan is, once I'm satisfied with the overall finish, then I'll put another coat of primer on it just to smooth everything up. But it sands a little bit harder than a regular primer, but that's okay, because what I want on these is a good, tough finish. And you can see that the as sprayed finish is really nice. It's a nice, almost eggshell, maybe even smoother than that. It's kind of hard to see being white, but hopefully you can tell how smooth it is. They say don't spray wet coats, but I went ahead and did it because I think that's more about it being kind of hot, maybe a little too hot for styrene if you spray it real heavily. But I didn't have to worry about that, obviously, because these are metal parts. So I went ahead and hosed it on because I wanted to really get a good build that would give me a nice clean surface. And I may have overdone it in a couple of spots. It got a little bit of you can see it does spray out fairly thin, and you can't really probably see it very well, but I got a couple of spots there where I have some slight runs, but overall, I'm real happy with the result, and now I'm going to just get busy with my tub of elbow grease and do some sanding. Okay, so here's just a quick little note. I've been pondering a lot what's the most effective way to paint these wheels. It is true that the entire wheel is black, spokes, nipples, and all, and so that would naturally lead you to believe that painting the whole thing as an assembled unit is the right thing to do. But I already know that it's going to be difficult to get nice even coverage on the entire thing. It's hard enough with this hub, for example, not covered in spokes, to get the airbrush at the right angle to get this sprayed in here inside that flange, for example. And I mean, I don't want rough paint. So I've been thinking a lot about this. And one of the things that I was considering was, what if I could darken or blacken the spokes and maybe even the nipples using something other than paint? Because obviously painting 72 of these and then trying to assemble them without scratching them is a bad plan. So I thought, well, while I'm sitting here sanding these parts, why not do a little science experiment? And so I threw one of the spokes into some burnishing liquid that's normally used for tank tracks. And it did absolutely nothing, as you can see. That spoke is still just as perfectly shiny chrome looking as it was. And the truth is, I have no idea what these spokes are made out of. They may be steel that's been plated, or they may be stainless, or they may be something like nickel silver rod. I just don't know. Clearly, whatever it is, it does not react to burnishing fluid. And I honestly have no idea what is in burnishing fluid or exactly how it's supposed to work. I just was like, hey, this is an easy experiment. So anyway, so I think the conclusion that I'm starting to come to is that this is going to be a kind of a compromise solution, where what I will probably do is go ahead and reprime all of these pieces after I've finished sanding them, and then spray these hubs black, and then assemble the entire wheel, and then paint the entire wheel, and just hope that I'm able to avoid any roughness, any overspray, any issues like that. So we'll see when that point comes. Okay, so this is a good time for an update. As you can see, I've got about half of the spokes, well, exactly half of the spokes in the front wheel, but in true Rube Goldberg fashion, this looks kind of like a mess. And there's a lot going on here that needs some explanation. So let me first start with talking about the rim and the fixture. Okay, as you can see here, let's see. As you can see here, what they want you to do is put the rim and the hub onto this fixture with the star-shaped spokes in it, and then just basically keep the hub centered up there with that axle that's poked through. Now, that doesn't really work because it's super janky. The hub, the axle just basically flops around in there because it's a large clearance hole. Fortunately, there is a molded-in recess for a nut on the bottom, and so I added that, but that didn't really solve the problem. Still too loose. So what I did is I put another nut on the top side of the, what am I knocking over here? Anyway, I put another nut on the top side on the axle right there. That held the axle pretty firm. But as I would find out pretty quickly, that still leaves the hub free to spin, and that's not good. So what I did is I made a little spacer there, you can see, just out of a piece of styrene tubing, and added another nut on top of the axle there, and that secures the hub and holds it tight, which is what you really need. So that takes care of the hub. Now, what about all of these zip ties that are on the outside of the rim? Okay, so what's going on with the rim? As you can see from the instructions, what they want you to do is drop the rim onto the fixture. where it should be resting in that annular groove there. Yeah, now I say drop it on there in heavy quotes because, yeah, that doesn't happen. The problem is, and I kind of knew this going into it because I had noticed it as I was working along, this rim, yeah, not even close to round, and you find that out pretty quickly when you try and put it on there. So what I did is I used some clamps, the one-handed trigger style bar clamps, to squeeze the rim in all of the big spots and get it as close to round as I possibly could. That wasn't too big of a deal. It still wasn't quite perfect though, and I knew there wasn't going to be any way to get it that exact. And so after going through several iterations of how to clamp it to the fixture and take out the vertical runout, if you want to call it that. This is my 3D printing guy. I got to answer the phone. Hey, John, you're live on camera because I'm actually filming a segment right now.
Oh, great.
So tell me what.
There's only one part came out bad. That was that one sign plate.
Oh, okay. So 16 parts came out good. One part did not.
Yeah, and the little seat thing. If you look at the left side of the picture, see the two brackets on it that have the holes.
Yeah.
That one little tiny spot there. If you blow it up, you can see that it didn't fill in It didn't fill in that little edge.
Okay, so you're gonna rerun that one too?
I can, if you want, or can you fix that easily enough?
Hold on, let me look at the picture again. I did not notice that. Let's see here, where are we at? That's
looks
what...
Like
it looks like what?
Looks like a seat frame to me.
Oh, I see what you're talking about. Yeah, that is the seat frame, and that part that didn't fill is what the number plate attaches to. So it kind of needs to be good. Oh wait, no, that's the. Well, let me think about this for a second. Yeah, that's fine because all that is. I mean, I can't fix it, but all that does is keep the number plate from spinning around on the bolt that holds it to the frame.
Oh, I can fix it. I mean, that's not that big of a deal.
Okay.
I can just throw a brass rod in that hole with a little bit of mold release on it and fill the other end with some 2-part epoxy putty and sand it down.
Oh, right on. Okay, cool. Whatever's easy, man. It's not gonna show, so it doesn't have to be perfect. It just the peg that's on the back of the side plates just has to fit through that hole.
Yeah. And if you look on the right hand side of the picture, you see the number plate that didn't come out.
Yeah. Hold on a second. Let me pull that picture back up. Yeah, I see that. And that's
weird. So it decided I'm reprinting right now.
Okay.
So.
Yeah. Cool. All right, man. Well, I'm stoked. Then that's gonna be really cool when I get all those. The foot pegs look great.
Yeah, everything else looks like it turned out really good.
Awesome. All right. Well, I'll let you get back to work then, and I will look forward to your next report.
You're obviously not banned on Facebook anymore.
No, I'm still muted. They just gave me a timeout for 24 hours, and it ends at like noon today, so it's all good. I don't need to be on there saying stupid shit anyway.
Well, basically somebody turned you in is what it was. I was talking to Patrick about it.
No, it didn't. It was the kind of image that just automatically sets off their sensors because it was just a little too risque. Yeah. I mean, it literally happened within like 1 second after I posted it. So I just have to be more careful with the memes I make from now on, I guess.
There you go. All right, man. All right, you have a good rest of your day. I'll send you more pictures after I get them all cleaned up.
Okay, thanks, John. I appreciate it.
Talk to you later. Bye.
So that was kind of cool. I decided to just let that run. That is John Geigel from Masterpiece Models, who is doing a bunch of SLA 3D printing for me for another project I'm working on, which you probably could decipher is also a motorcycle type project. But anyway, enough of that. What I was starting to say is that after farting around with it a lot, I eventually just figured out that I could zip tie the shit out of the rim and pull it down to the fixture, and that holds it. That gets rid of most of the vertical run out. So now that I have the hub and the rim fixed onto the fixture, I thought that getting the spokes on there was going to be fairly easy, and that I had done all the hard work. Yeah, not so much. The first challenge with the spokes is that they want you to put a little bend in the end of it and trim it. So, and the reason, the thing you have to keep in mind here is that these spokes go in the opposite of how they go in to a real motorcycle wheel and hub. Real spokes, when you look at the end with the crook on it, are riveted to a head. So basically, that end of it would look like a nail that had been bent at 90 degrees. And what you do is you put the threaded end of the spoke, this end, through the hub first. You thread it through there, and then through the hole in the rim, and then you screw the nipple on. Well, that's not how this thing works, because obviously you don't have the little head on the spoke. So what they want you to do is put the spoke through the hole in the rim, then insert the crook into the hole on the hub, then slide the nipple on, and then secure it all. And so the reason I guess they want you to put the hook on there is so that they stay put a little bit better. And that was a little bit of a challenge, but I figured it out. I don't know what these spokes are made out of. They're not as hard as I thought they might be. And so what I did is I made a little fixture. I just put an angle on this piece of brass tubing. You can see it's got a little notch in it. And so then all I have to do to put a crook in that spoke is drop it in there, then take my pliers and just latch onto it. And I shouldn't even be wasting time doing this on camera. That's not too bad. So that puts just enough of a, come on camera, focus up. That puts just enough of a crook in it. I say just enough because here's the thing, is even after you do the other thing they want you to do, which is clip the end that you just bent to where it's like 1/3 as long as it just was, they still are a little bit difficult to insert into the hole on the hub without wiggling it around and getting at an angle, which is difficult for the ones where you're inserting it up from underneath, because I don't know if you can see this or not, but half of the spokes, the first half, come from underneath the flange and the other half go from the top. So you put all the ones in from the underneath side first, and then you do the ones on the top. Now, the problem is that with this thing laying here like this, even with the little hook in on the end there, they don't stay in the holes. That's the first problem. You spend a lot of time, getting that little hook in the little hole, and as soon as you let go with your tweezers, it just falls right back out. If it doesn't fall right back out, it definitely falls out when you start trying to slide the nipple onto the other end. And you definitely don't want to glue it over here first, because you have to be certain that you've got the orientation and the angles correct, that you're going from the correct spot on the hub to the correct spot on the rim before you do any gluing. So ideally you want to get all these in there before you lock them in. So as you can see, what I ended up doing was And this almost beat me yesterday. I was so pissed off. I finally had to step away and go think about it. And the idea that occurred to me was to just put some white tack wrapped around the hub underneath there and use that as a support and as I inserted each one of those spokes from underneath. And that worked pretty good. So I got all of those in. Got the first half of this half. Got all those in. Then came back, and it was pretty straightforward to just lay in the second half of this half, all the ones that come in from the top. So once I had all those in there, then I put another piece of white tack on top of that to hold them all down while I, studied the situation. And then once I was satisfied that everything was good, that all my angles were correct, I marked my starting point and just got my super thin CA glue and my glue looper, this is the large size one. It's perfect for this. And after making sure that each spoke and nipple were fully seated the way that they were supposed to be, I just wicked some CA in there. And once I had all of them in, then I came back with some kicker just to make sure it was all hardened up. And so now all of these first 18 spokes are in there and they're secure on the outside end. Now, that's not enough to make me confident that I'm going to pull this off of here yet. What I'm going to do next is I'm going to add a little bit, very small amounts of super glue to the inboard end. I don't want to get too much because I don't want to glue the white tack in there. I don't want to make a mess. Anyway, once I'm satisfied that those are secured in there just enough, then I'm going to get that white tack out of there. Once I'm satisfied that everything is ship-shape, then I will go ahead and clip these zip ties off, flip the thing over, and repeat the whole process. And so I'll come back and probably show you what it's like after both wheels are finished. Alrighty then, well, this is just how this is going to go. I just did like 5 minutes of recording without having hit the record button. So, here we go again. As you can see, I have not finished both of these wheels because what I said at the end of the last clip about showing them to you when I was all done, famous last words, derailed by a self-inflicted gunshot wound. So, this is going to be a little bit of story time. But as you can see, this wheel is all done and it looks pretty good. But when you study it a little closer, there are a couple of issues that leave me a little unhappy about it. The main one is that if you look real close, you can see that the hub is just not in there straight. And I'm not too surprised by that because even though the fixturing was good and there's really not any way to do it wrong, so I don't know what I would have done differently. The fact is that there's just some wobble in these sheet metal parts, and I kind of figured that's where it might show up, and that's the case. But there's really not much you can do about that. There's just obviously no way to true these things since you don't have actual threaded nipples. So just going to have to live with that, and I think it'll probably be okay. The thing I'm really most concerned about, though, is that if you look, you can see there's pretty much zero dish on this side of the wheel. In other words, there's no angle between as the spoke goes from the rim to the hub like there is on the other side. And I'm worried about how that's going to affect the way that the wheel clears the forks on this side, because when I look at the instructions, I don't see any sort of spacer or anything that goes in here. So I'm a little concerned about that, and again, I don't know what I could have done differently with the fixturing to solve that. But so it kind of is what it is. But it's a weird thing because I've never seen a wheel that did not have equal dish on both sides. So maybe that's just the way it is. I don't know. This is, as it turns out, not a 36 spoke wheel, that as I keep saying, but a 40 spoke wheel. So who knows? Maybe it's different in other ways too. We'll see. Like I said, there's not much I can do about it at this point. Anyway, the other thing that I'm a little bit bummed out about is the way that the spoke ends turned out. You can see that where I clipped them off, they're a little bit ragged where they show there. And on this side, I decided I'm just, going to have to live with it, mostly because it's really difficult to do anything about at this point, but also because once this is all painted up, this isn't really going to show too much. So not too big of a deal. On the other side, however, it's a little bit different story. And this is where we get into these cute little brass buttons and where this all went awry. So I decided with these spokes to do a couple of things to make them look better where they poked through this flange. One was that I trimmed them a little bit shorter on the end that's got the bend in it. So I trimmed them to where they were like really literally only about a third as long right there. Then I came back and I used my little Proxxon abrasive disc and I squared them up, or at least made them look a lot better. So they did definitely look better once I had all this assembled, but I still didn't like it. It just still didn't seem right, because I had been looking at a reference photo of a brough Superior that showed the front wheel pretty well, and I noticed that all of these spoke heads, or the rivet heads, or whatever you want to call them, were real easy to see, and I felt like it needed something more than just the tip of the spoke poking out through there to look right. So I thought, well, I'll flush them off with my little abrasive wheel, and then I'll just put a little drop of super glue on there, and that'll represent a kind of a dome head rivet. Well, that looked like ass, so got rid of all that and decided to punch out some little brass discs to represent those rivet heads. And as you can see, I super glued those on there, and they look sweet. And this is what they look like. You can see I got a bunch of them in this little cup. So all's good, all's well. Good, all's well that ends well, right? Yeah, well, maybe. Because it was during the process of punching all of these out that things just really went to the stupid. So the way I punch these kind of things out is I've got this wonderful punch and die set, actually a couple of them, that are made by UMM. Unique Model Making, I think is what that stands for. Anyway, UMM has all kinds of cool tools. And these little punch and die sets are just one of, and they're awesome. You can see they've got a bunch of different sizes, and the design is really good for just popping out little discs, because even for really small diameters, you've got the punch is full size where it goes through the guide, which means that you're not likely to bend that little tiny punch or break it off or whatever. It's a really good design, and I've used it to do this sort of thing quite a bit. But one thing that's difficult about it is that because the fit is so tight, and you know, when you're punching through sheet plastic or brass or whatever, it has a tendency for the material to grab onto the punch once it's gone all the way through there. So what happens, if you can imagine it, is that you've got a sheet of material that's impaled by that little punch tip, and it's totally hung on it, and it's a real hassle, especially with my weak and clumsy fingers, to then pull the punch out, which is why it's got this wad of Abe's epoxy sculpt on there. If you don't know what Abe's is, it's two-part epoxy that's got some metal filler in it, and it's really great for, you know, filler, as a shaper, whatever, because you can pretty much mold it into anything you want it to for like an hour after you mix it up. And so I have a bunch of these that I basically put a little handle on, as you can see, to be able to pull them out easier. Well, yeah, so that's great. But I came to a point earlier this year with a project where I needed to punch out like 100 little discs. And I just did not want to do that whole rigmarole of trying to yank that punch out of there 100 times. So I got the bright idea of buying this thing here, which is a Northwest short line. I think it's called a Sensapress or Instapress, or I don't know, maybe, there you go, Sensapress. Anyway, it's pretty cool. It's basically a miniature arbor press. And as it turns out, they make it with a hole in the end of the ram that was pretty close to the right same size as these punches. So I took it down to my local machine shop and had them do some modifications, which included center drilling these dies, opening up the bore in the ram. It already was tapped for this little set screw here, and then I had them drill and tap a hole in the base of the press, so that if I shift my camera angle here a little bit, you can see that what I'm able to do is just run the ram up and down, and it makes it, at least in theory, a lot easier to pull the punch out of the material. And it does work awesome for that. I can sit here and punch stuff all day long. At least that's what I thought. And I've used it on brass and aluminum, and not a big deal. The material that I used for all of these little discs is this is, I think, 5/1000ths brass sheet, and it punches pretty nicely. Anyhow, the problem was, or the problems started when the 1.2 millimeter punch that I needed still had this epoxy sculpt on here. Now let me tell you something. You could build a damn spaceship with epoxy sculpt and launch it into orbit, and a million years from now it would still be in one piece, because this stuff is incredibly tough. Basically, the way that I have to get this off of here is to use my Proxxon abrasive wheel that I showed you a minute ago, cut like 4 grooves around this so that it's cut all the way down to the metal, and then use a little blowtorch lighter that I have that I normally use to clean my super glue loopers with. Blows a nice hot little flame. You can see, maybe you can see. Anyway, once you burn the shit out of the epoxy sculpt and turn it into a black cinder, it basically then can be knocked right off of there with a few blows from something like the side of my little anvil. Makes a great little hammer. So anyway, at this point yesterday, I had gone through all of that trouble to get the little handle off of the 1.2 millimeter punch. And I'm thinking I'm all good, right? Yeah, not so much, because somehow when I started to put this all together and run the punch into the die, it got stuck. And at first I was like, well, yeah, that happens. And I pulled it out and I cleaned it off and I polished it up and I got it to where I could, move it in and out fairly well, I thought. And then I put it back in there and there was a little bit of resistance, so I just went ahead and ran it through with the ram and thought I was good. Yeah, well, when I raised it back up, it stayed put. And the more I messed with it, the more I realized how firmly it was stuck. And long story less long, I don't know how it happened, but this punch got so thoroughly stuck in this die. I mean, it was galled. There was nothing I could do. I had a big pair of vice grips. I had all kinds of things that I was trying to pull that thing out of there. I could turn it a little bit, but I could not pull it out. And I was just struggling. And there was nothing, it wasn't coming out. I heated up the little die a little bit, because nothing was working. So finally, I got some big vice grips on this punch, flipped it over so that this thing was resting on my vise, and then started pounding on the vice grips, and it started to move. And it started to move, and it started to move, and I kept pounding. And then, of course, there was the one stray hit where I landed on this flange right here and bent the shit out of it so that this gap right here was totally closed up and the whole thing was just mangled. And I was furious. Anyhow, later, after calming down, having some lunch, and catching my breath, I came back and I jammed a screwdriver in there and sort of bent the thing back into shape right there, and figured out that, I should say that I did go ahead and get the punch out of there. I kind of unmangled it as best I could, did some more polishing and grinding, and got it where the punch would run back through the die. And I was like, okay, fine. So at that point, I went ahead and took the time to punch out the discs and got them all glued on here, and was pretty stoked, pretty pleased with myself for how it turned out, and for the fact that I had been persistent and that I had adapted and overcome and all that bullshit. And then I checked the fit of the brake cover that goes over this, and that's the point where I discovered that I had been looking at a 1930 something or other brough photograph, and that when you actually look at photographs of a 1927 through 31 brough, that the brake thing that goes right here completely covers every single one of these spoke heads. So I didn't need to have done any of that. I didn't need to smooth them down. I didn't need to clean up the ends of them. None of them were going to show on this side at all. So there you go. And that is just how we roll out here at Rube Goldberg Enterprises. And honestly, this is probably the thing that gets me the most with my model making. I'm a very tenacious person. Most of my friends know that. That's part of how I've worked my way as far as I have through the recovery from my spinal cord injury. It's enabled me to be successful in a lot of things, but it's also a double-edged sword because I have a tendency to get tunnel vision. And this right here is a monument to tunnel vision. Okay, so apparently I am just a complete idiot and I cannot handle a video camera because I keep forgetting to turn the damn thing on or losing files or doing something. And the segment that was supposed to be right here is gone. And so I'm just going to have to narrate based on these 3 photos, which fortunately I did take. So the thing that I said earlier that I was suspicious about, the 0 dish on the left side of the wheel being a problem, well, yeah, suspicion confirmed. As you can see from these photos, it is a huge problem because the rim is not supposed to be touching that left fork leg. It is supposed to be very clearly in the middle, and it's not. And on very little research, very little looking at the situation, there was no doubt that I was going to have to fix that wheel somehow by moving that hub over to the other side, like 80 thousandths of an inch. And how I was going to do that was not totally clear, but that's going to be the subject of episode 4. So there you go. Hate to leave you in suspense like that, but I'm going to save the resolution of this problem until episode 4. I say hopefully, because there's no guarantee I'm going to get it resolved then either. But I guess we'll see. At any rate, I appreciate you guys watching. Take care. Much love.